Om Aganda Timarandasya Ganajana Shivakaya Chakshur Umrisamyena Tajma Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him.
Krishna Kirtana Bhanana Tanapano.
Hare Krishna. Welcome back to this video series on the Bhagavad Gita as it is, translated by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are currently on chapter 15, the Yoga of the Supreme Person. Krishna describes in chapter 15 the process of freeing oneself from matter's grip. He begins by comparing the material world to a gigantic upside-down banyan tree. Although the foolish cannot understand that the soul transmigrates from one body to another according to the mind's desires, transcendentalists see this clearly. Krishna reveals that knowing Him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engaging in His service is the ultimate purpose of Vedanta and the most confidential part of the Vedas. Text number 1. The Blessed Lord said, "There is a banyan tree which has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this tree with the weapon of detachment. So doing, one must seek that place from which, having once gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything has begun and whom everything is abiding since time immemorial. One who is free from illusion, false prestige, and false association, who understands the eternal, who is done with material lust and is freed from the duality of happiness and distress, and who knows how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attains that eternal kingdom. That abode of mine is not illuminated by the sun or moon, nor by electricity. One who reaches it never returns to this material world. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. Chapter 14 described the modes of material nature, those forces that simultaneously restrict and control a soul within his field of activities. Now Krishna, using an allegory of an asvatha, a banyan tree, describes the entire material world, with its varieties of fields of activities situated on higher and lower branches of that tree. The banyan tree of the material world is upside down, roots up and branches down, because it only reflects reality, the reality of the spiritual world. Just as a reflection rests upon water, this tree rests upon the desire of the living entities. Srila Prabhupada further explains, the entanglement of this material world is compared here to a banyan tree. For one who is engaged in fruitive activities, there is no end to the banyan tree. He wanders from one branch to another, to another, to another. The tree of this material world has no end, and for one who is attached to this tree, there is no possibility of liberation. If one can understand this indestructible tree of illusion, then one can get out of it. This process of extrication should be understood. In the previous chapters, it has been explained that there are many processes by which to get out of the material entanglement. Up to the 13th chapter, we have seen that devotional service to the Supreme Lord is the best way. Now, The basic principle of devotional service is detachment from material activities and attachment to the transcendental service of the Lord. The process of breaking attachment to the material world is discussed in the beginning of this chapter. Depending upon which branch a living entity is located, he will possess a certain material body and a specific type of senses. And according to the combination of the modes that influences that part of the tree, he will be attracted to a particular twigs or sense objects. Thus, the living entity traveling from one birth to the next, from the higher branches of demigod life to the lower branches of animal life, seeks pleasure, but in fact attains only further entrapment into the fruitive action and future deaths. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that philosophers have their own opinions about the nature of the world. Is it real? Is it false? Is it eternal? And so on. Because the real form of this tree cannot be perceived, are we unable, out of our own ignorance, to cut down the banyan tree of this material world? No. But it must be cut down. This tree is so strongly rooted that it cannot be pulled down. The axe by which we cut it down is made of detachment and renunciation, and it is sharpened by knowledge and discrimination. We must cut down this tree completely by full detachment, lest our minds run again towards sense gratification. The process of surrender that was stressed in verse 5 is highlighted by Srila Prabhupada in his purport. The first qualification is that one should not be deluded by pride, because the conditioned soul is puffed up, thinking himself the lord of material nature. It is very difficult for him to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should know, by the cultivation of real knowledge, that he is not the Lord of material nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Lord. When one is freed from delusion caused by pride, he can begin the process of surrender. One has to get out of this false notion that human society is the propriety of this world. And when one has an understanding of things as they are, he becomes free from all dual conceptions such as happiness and distress, pleasure and pain. He becomes full of knowledge. Then it is possible for him to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just as Krishna is eternal, Krishna's fragmental, eternal parts, the living entities, are certainly also eternal. Krishna's use of the word Sanatan in verse 7 informs us that the living entity's eternality as an individual is not illusionary, as the Mayavadis claim. We are all unique and eternally part and partial of Krishna. Now, however, all conditioned living entities are unnaturally captivated by Maya, and rather than achieving pleasure, they are forced to struggle and suffer as they plan for the elusive future pleasures. This verse hints at the mind's power to determine the living entity's future, and the next verse continues that thrust, explaining how, determined by his thoughts, the soul attains his next body. Text number 8. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as air carries aromas. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, tongue, and nose and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all of this. The endeavoring transcendentalist who is situated in self-realization can see all this clearly, but those who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what has taken place, though they may try to. The splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of the fire are also from me. I enter into each planet, and by my energy they stay in orbit. I become the moon and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables. I am the fire of digestion in every body, and I am the air of life, outgoing and incoming, by which I digest the 4 kinds of foodstuff. In text 8, Krishna says, the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it and takes another. Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport to this text, here, the living entity is described as Ishvara, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to a higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to a lower class. Minute independence is there. The change his body undergoes depends on him. At the time of death, the consciousness he has created will carry him on to the next type of body. If he has made his consciousness like that of a cat or a dog, he is sure to change to a cat or dog's body. And if he has fixed his consciousness on godly qualities, he will change into the form of a demigod. And if he is in Krishna consciousness, he will be transferred to Krishna Loka in the spiritual world and will associate with Krishna. It is a false claim that after the annihilation of this body, everything is finished. The individual soul is transmigrating from one body to another, and his present body and present activities are the background of his next body. One gets a different body according to his karma, and he has to quit this body in due course. It is stated here that the subtle body, which carries the conception of the next body, develops another body in the next life. This process of transmigrating from one body to another and struggling while in the body is called karsati, or the struggle for existence. We can perceive that when the blowing wind passes over a fragrant rose garden, it acquires a sweet scent. Yet, the air itself is not sweet. Its sweetness is acquired. When that same air passes over sewage, its odor becomes vile. Again, the air's foul smell is not the actual scent of the air, but rather the scent of that with which the air has come into contact. Similarly, although the soul is trapped in a gross body and subtle mind, he remains aloof from all his apparent qualities, whether he exhibits the fragrant mode of goodness or the foul mode of ignorance. After taking shelter of his mind's desires and obtaining his next body and senses, the living entity begins to exploit his specifically allotted sense objects. Our particular body, its eyes, ears, tongue, nose, and all else is formed around our mind's desires. If we desire to fly, to hang glide, for example, why undergo the tribulation of artificially attaching ourselves to wings? If our life's pleasure is scuba diving, why go to the trouble of having to resurface to fill air tanks? It's easier to become a fish. Based on the mind's desire, a gross body is generated with a particular facility for pleasure. Those who lack knowledge are vibhudas. They are blinded by unending attempts to enjoy their senses. Because they identify with the happiness and distress arising from the senses, they remain unable to distinguish matter from spirit. Their intense desire for bodily and mental pleasure has covered their ability to experience their own spiritual existence. What is the cure for this ignorance? Krishna says, knowledge. Whose eyes are trained in knowledge by hearing and learning Shastra can see. pure-hearted spiritualists see that the soul transmigrates. The blind who lack knowledge see nothing. Even one without knowledge, however, can see Krishna in his opulent manifestations in matter and become attracted to him. In text 6, Krishna described the spiritual world as not needing sunlight, moonlight, fire, or electricity. In the material world, however, we need such things, and Krishna says that he is their source. Although we, conditioned souls in our pride, acknowledge neither our dependence on Krishna nor upon those things produced by him, we are nevertheless fully dependent on the sun, moon, and fire. Krishna's choice of examples is therefore most excellent, because it is he who is maintaining us by providing our most basic necessities of life. The potency of vegetables, so essential for strength, health, and the pleasure of our palate, is supplied by Krishna. Yet even eating causes misery without the fire of digestion, which also comes from Krishna. Again, we are fully dependent on Krishna as our maintainer. Krishna completes his description of himself as maintainer in the next verse. Text number 15. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. There are two classes of beings, the fallible and infallible. In the material world, every living entity is fallible. In the spiritual world, every living entity is infallible. Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the Lord himself, who has entered into these worlds and is maintaining them. Because I am transcendental, beyond both the fallible and infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that Supreme Person. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without doubting, is to be understood as the knower of everything, and he therefore engages himself in full devotional service, O son of Bart. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one, and it is disclosed now by me. Whoever understands this will become wise, and his endeavors will know perfection. This verse summarizes chapter 15. One who knows Krishna as the Supreme serves him with devotion, which awards both wisdom and perfection. What happens to one who doesn't serve Krishna? As Prabhupada explains in his purport, however intelligent he may be in the estimation of some common men, he is not perfectly intelligent. Srila Prabhupada also comments on the word ananga in his purport to this verse. The word ananga, which means O sinless one, by which Arjuna is addressed, is significant. Ananga, O sinless one, means that unless one is free from all sinful reactions, it is very difficult to understand Krishna. One has to become free from all contamination, all sinful activities, then he can understand. But devotional service is so pure and potent that once one is engaged in devotional service, he automatically comes to the stage of sinlessness. While one is performing devotional service in the association of pure devotees in full Krishna consciousness, there are certain things which require to be vanquished altogether. The most important thing one has to surmount is weakness of the heart. The first fall down is caused by the desire to lord over material nature. Thus, one gives up the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. The second weakness of the heart, as one increases the propensity to lord it over material nature, he becomes attached to matter and the possession of matter. The problems of material existence are due to these weaknesses of the heart. In this chapter, the first 5 verses describe the process of freeing oneself from these weaknesses of the heart, and the rest of the chapter, from the 6th verse through the end, discusses Purushottama Yoga. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur further explains Krishna's thoughts. Just as the fire of digestion, as within the stomach, I am situated in the hearts of all moving and non-moving beings as the principle of intelligence. Indeed, from me, the intelligent principle, comes remembrance of things once experienced, forgetfulness and perception born from contact of the senses with their objects. In text 16, Krishna reveals that there are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In this world, everyone is fallible, but in the spiritual world, everyone is infallible. Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport, as already explained, the Lord in his incarnation as Vasudeva compiled the Vedanta Sutra. Here the Lord is giving, in summary, the contents of the Vedanta Sutra. He says that the living entities, who are innumerable, can be divided into two classes, the fallible and infallible. The living entities are eternally separated parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When they are in contact with the material world, they are called Jiva Bhuta. And the Sanskrit words given here, Kashara, Sarva, Bhutani, means that they are fallible. Those who are in oneness with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, are called infallible. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is different from all other living entities and is the source of both the Brahman and the Paramatma features of the Absolute Truth. Prabhupada's purport explains, no one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, neither the conditioned souls nor the liberated soul. He is therefore the greatest of personalities. The Supreme Personality is exhibiting and diffusing his spiritual effulgence, which is the ultimate illumination. That Supreme Personality of Godhead also has a localized aspect known as Paramatma. This knowledge is the true fruit of the Vedas, and one who knows it becomes a knower of everything. Therefore, he performs pure devotional service. In his purport to text 19, Srila Prabhupada writes, Vedic knowledge is called Shruti, learning by oral reception. One should actually receive the Vedic message from authorities like Krishna and his representatives. Here, Krishna distinguishes everything very nicely, and one should hear from this source. Simply to hear like hogs is not sufficient. One must be able to understand from the authorities. It is not that one should simply speculate academically. One should submissively hear from Bhagavad Gita that these living entities are always subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anyone who is able to understand this according to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, knows the purpose of the Vedas. No one else knows the purpose of the Vedas. That ends this episode. Thank you for watching. Hope you return when we will discuss chapter 16, entitled The Divine and Demoniac Natures. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tana Param Premam Tam Vira Dhira Jana Priya Priya Kana Nema Sajam Pujito Krishna Kirtana Ganana